Okay, well, thank you so much for everybody coming today for this event organized by Nonviolent Peaceforce. Thank you very much online as well. I'm not sure how many people are online.
Hundreds.
Hundreds, okay. Wonderful. So it's always special to welcome people in our embassy. This is especially special. I don't say it all the time, but this is it's a long partnership with Nonviolent Peaceforce NP. We started working together since 2022. We carried on our partnership, and we are looking forward to further supporting NP. The Swiss cooperation and the humanitarian aid of the Swiss embassy, we are trying to be as much local as possible. We are supporting the localization process. In this instance, what we do, we try to apply this why not local, and we try to ensure that when we have expertise, competencies, experience from national partners, we will, as much as possible, support national partners, and it's something that we want to develop further. With NP, we can say we apply all the criteria of why not local, and we can say we still want to work with NP in Ukraine. And because there is an added value, there is a very specific type of work that NP does, and we're very happy to continue with this. They're also a global partner of SDC. We work in different countries with NP, so it's not just in Ukraine. So that's also important for us. Another aspect of what we're trying to promote, Oleg, my colleague here, can also is our localization specialist, but also protection specialist and duty of care. And this is another thing that with NP we've been doing for the past few years, accompanying this process, ensuring that humanitarian workers are protected, better protected. The minimum package was also introduced. So there's a lot of things that we have in common, that we believe together, and it's always very important when we manage to put this into practice. Last week, I believe, or a few days ago, our ambassador went to Kramatorsk and had the opportunity to meet volunteers, organizations that work in this very difficult setup. He was accompanied by our head of cooperation, and that's another example of being able to see what are the conditions, and NP with their hub in Kramatorsk is obviously providing a lot of support to the sector, and the work, the amazing work. Every time I mention it, it's always super important to remember the important work of the national partners that work in very difficult conditions. Our colleague from RCC here is one of them, but there's many of you also working there. Now, another aspect of our work that was special with NP was frequency analyzers, where there was a very deep analysis of could this be something that could be applied, can be used, and NP was one of the partner that provided this expertise in helping us come to the conclusion that yes, it doesn't contravene or go against the IHL, and frequency analyzers can be also used. So a lot of things that we're very happy to work together. I'm not going to go any further. I just want to welcome you very much, all of you. I want to especially welcome the representative of the ministry, Mr. Anatoly, the Deputy Minister of Social Policy. Thank you very much for coming and joining us here. All of you, there's a UN representative of FAO, there's the NGO platform, a lot of NGO, there's the UN as well here. There's a colleague from our colleague from the international cooperation, and also from the Swiss Embassy, we have colleagues from the Department of Peace Promotion and Human Rights, more or less right. But yeah, it's good that we have a lot of different types of people here. I'm going to stop now because I'm already talked too much. Leave it to you, Yomi, and voila. Thank you so much. Just maybe one more thing in case of an alert. There is a system. We will receive information from our security. If there is a direct threat, we will be asked to go to a shelter. But this is an individual decision as well. If you don't feel comfortable before we get these instructions, you're all welcome to go to the shelter anyway, as soon as something is announced. With that, welcome again, and Yomi, hold the floor. Thanks.
First, thanks Surgeon Oleg and SDC for hosting us, but also to CDO that with the SDC helped fund the project that we're doing in the assessment. Before I pass it over to Martha, who's the program, what do you do?
Everything.
Program Development and Assessment Manager, who is lead on this assessment, but also Victoria, who's our M&E and Assessment Officer, who really led on the consolidation of the data, the cleaning of the data, and like upload to Power BI, which we'll be walking through, and how this tool, you're able to interact with it and work on it. We have Tatiana in the back, who's our comms and advocacy manager, so she'll be taking photos and asking you questions, but if you don't want a photo, she's perceptive. She'll acknowledge your lack of not wanting to have a photo taken. I'm Yomi, head of programs for Nonviolent Peaceforce Ukraine. Kind of wanted to introduce this assessment in a way that grounds us, like most of us in the room probably know NP from our frontline work, our support to local humanitarians, the establishment of volunteer hubs in Kramatorsk and Kherson to make sure that there's a resource, a safe space, and like a platform for local organizations to both coordinate with themselves as well as a bridge to international organizations, frontline evacuation work, duty of care work that we've done with SDC, FCDO, and UHF, also led with RCC and our partnership with them for a long time now. But fundamentally, NP, I mean, that's been a product of what is needed in Ukraine. So this kind of frontline response, emergency response. But more holistically, NP is a community-based organization that is working side by side with communities to best understand not just the perceptions of safety and security within conflict areas, but how can they be addressed? And trying to understand how do those perceptions and those realities change decision-makings and behaviors. And so we try to work with communities deeply on this. And this is where a lot of the work that Serge was mentioning comes from. But this assessment is a bit of a product of that. It's really meant to ground some of the decisions and the conversations we were having or hearing about in the global context that were happening on an international and Ukrainian national level, grounding it with perceptions and the feelings of what Ukrainian citizens were feeling and seeing in that. So what do we have in store today? So we're going to be going through the assessment. Martha will be talking about the methodology, some of the key findings in the specific oblasts that it focused on, and it's along with NP's areas of operation, so Odessa, Mykolaiv, Kherson, Kharkiv, and Donetsk. I'm going to speak about kind of what is the bird's eye view across the kind of nation scope on this, as well as put together we have some recommendations of what some of this information is meant to inform. Because the real purpose of this is that there was let me put it this way. In kind of June of 2025, we saw a significant shift in international conversations and a lack of support, specifically from the US, but kind of the pressure that was being put on the entire system to come towards something like a peace agreement. And we saw a significant shift from conversations around what is a just peace to peace at any costs. And so we understood that these conversations were creating an echo chamber where the perceptions and the ideas and behaviors and levels of preparedness on community was not really informed on that. So the idea was to gather this information and to make it presentable so that at those decision-making layers, that this component, the civilian perception component, could be introduced to help inform, as well as, I should have gone to the next slide, inform and influence some decision-making at that level, at least take in consideration. And again, the idea is that once we understand these perceptions, we wanted to look at what it was that civilians were thinking about, in order to know like what the possible future scenarios were, and what communities were not doing in order to prepare for those. So this assessment is not meant to be a fortune teller. It's not going to say what is going to happen if a ceasefire happens or something of the like, but to understand community perception, and then to try to influence, if a community sees something going in one direction, what can they do now to prepare for it, either physically or to how to position themselves and their kind of advocacy or their support or what they would need in the eventuality of this. So there's a few aspects during the presentation where we're going to ask for your participation. There'll be a QR code. We'll have a fun survey to see what you guys think in the room and online. But there'll be a section at the end for any sort of questions. If there's something burning in your soul, throw your hand up and Martha will definitely give space for that if you can't move on without knowing the answer. And as a last piece, this is meant to be a kind of interactive dashboard that has legs. It's not meant to be a one-off publication. It's something that hopefully will evolve, so we can see how perceptions evolve as the context evolves. So one way we're going to do this is we're going to have incremental updates, either quarterly or biannually. But the other idea that we're looking at, and happy to have discussions afterwards where there's food and wine afterwards, some people need it to be coaxed. But the idea is that potentially sharing this out with the international community, so that there can be many different avenues to collect this data, and then NP will maybe start with ownership of it, but be able to consolidate it and then be able to share this with the sector as a whole to show how perceptions change and behaviors change and whatnot. So thanks for being here, and over to Martha, who's going to take you through.
Thank you, Yomi. So just briefly, before we go into the actual presentations and the findings, I just want to talk you through the methodology. So I think it's really important that we understand that this is an assessment. It's not a research. So it's a way for us to measure, make assumptions based on answers that civilians have given us, but it's not an in-depth research, just FYI. We have had over 130 KIIs across the 5 oblasts that Yomi just mentioned. And here you can see the breakdown. So 31 in Kharkivska, 25 in Donetska, 28 in Mykolaiivska, etc. And where you see all those blue marked areas are the hromadas where we interviewed people. And if you're really interested in knowing exactly which hromadas and what they answered, etc., that's why we have the interactive dashboards on the website, where you can really go and have a deep dive into each oblast and hopefully can feed into your programming. So overall, the data set we ended up with was 80% women, mainly aged between 31 and 50. And around 69% of those we interviewed were host communities, 18% IDPs, and 13% returnees. Around 50% of those interviewed also were either related to a veteran, someone currently serving, or someone in capturement right now. So that also shows a data set that's quite diverse and have had different experiences of the war, something that was very important for us to capture. Another thing that was really important for us was the fact that we are really asking civilians what they think. So when we did this assessment, we basically went out on the streets in the hromadas, say for instance, Losova, and we made our protection teams engage and stop with people at different collective sites and so on. So it's not NGO workers, it's not INGO workers, it's not local authorities, or someone who maybe has more involvement in the humanitarian response, but really your everyday Ukrainian. That's at least what we were aiming to capture. So with that, of course, there comes some limitations. So because this was our data collection method, it meant that in each hромada, we don't have the exact number of IDPs, host communities, returnees interviewed, or even across oblasts. This means that when we do comparative analysis, it's not 100% accurate, because actually the sections captured in some oblasts will be more leaning towards one way because we interviewed more women, for instance. But overall, I think it will give you very good grounding on what is happening and what Yomi was saying earlier was civilians really feel in these oblasts and think. And then another important thing is that some places could not be revisited. So for instance, when we did this assessment for the first time in Kharkiv, it was in summer, and this time we could reach Kupiansk. Now, when we did it again in January, we were not able to reach Kupiansk for security reasons. So that's something to bear in mind, that as we do this periodically, front lines will shift and our access to civilians will change, again, limiting this comparative analysis that we were aiming for. So Victoria kindly just took us to the website, and I just want to show you how it works, as we have a lot of donors, NGOs in the room, and we really want this to be resourceful. So on the back of your booklet, and at the end of this presentation, there's a QR code, and it will take you to this website. So if you scroll down, you will see Ukraine National Overview. You will see the background that Yomi just went through. You'll see the methodology. And if you scroll down, you will also see a dashboard. And if you're really interested in the different oblasts, you can click on them to see the different responses. Oh, sorry, can you go up again on the national one? Yeah. So at the bottom, you see there are different tabs. So if you go to general information, you see the breakdown that I just mentioned, how many women, how many IDPs, etc. were interviewed. You see all the Rumadas that were interviewed. And then if you go to current security challenges, you see the different oblasts at the top that you can click on to get the different distributions. As you see, there are 3 different tabs here. It's current security challenges. There is Power BI. So if you scroll down here, there are different sections. There are current security challenges, future challenges, and coordination. This mirrors the questionnaire that we sent out, because we were really focusing on these 3 different areas. Why? Because we wanted to get a snapshot of what's happening right now, what civilians are expecting in the future, and also just harvesting their ideas of what we think can be done better in terms of international cooperation, local cooperation, etc. So all of these different tabs in different ways should be able to inform your response and what you should do in different oblasts and specifically Rumadas. So now, here it's more the overview, but if we really want to be specific, we can scroll even further down, and here you'll see all the oblasts. So if we go to Kharkiv, you will see that the exact 3 same sections are available here. So you have the current challenges, the future challenges, and coordination and support. And you also, if you scroll up you also have a narrative, and a bit down. You also have a narrative that matches the different tabs. So if you're not if your brain prefers words and analysis, you can look at the narrative. If you prefer graphs and nice colors, you can look at the Power BI. But this is kind of like a 2-hand report trying to show 2 sides of the same coin. Here for Kharkiv, we also have the June data. So this is what it would look like when we start doing this periodically, that you'll be able to see June, then January, and then June in 2026, and etc., etc. So if we scroll up again, I just want to show you the Kharkiv specific one we did in January. And here, if you go to current challenges, security challenges, so we all know that Lesova suddenly became a big transit space and a hub for a lot of people, civilians in movement. So if we're really interested in knowing what is the current security situation in Lesova based on civilians, we can click on this, just Lesova, and we will see a Rumada specific breakdown of what they've answered. So it's a very detailed research. It took us a lot of time, and therefore we would really like people to use it, which is one of the objectives for today, to really share this. But now, if you don't mind, I would also like to try and do the assessment on you. So we captured on what civilians think, and it would be really interesting to see what you guys think representing more a national level. So if we move to the Mentimeter and start the presentation, you will receive a QR code with us here. So if you could scan this, and we will do the same process of data collection that we did in the field with civilians. And also people online should be able to scan this, so it's not, it's very inclusive, I promise.
This is part of the assessment, not the whole.
Yes. So you can start improving. So the first question is, how do you find the overall security situation in Ukraine? So you feel free to submit your answers. we have also a lot of people. We'll wait until everyone. Okay. So we have 18 worsening, 5 staying the same, 2 improving. Results are still coming in, but basically we're all saying, well, the majority is saying that it's worsening. This is maybe something we did not expect if we look back on March 2025, that we would sit here in a year's time and say, actually, the situation is even worsening further. I think a lot of us in our Ukraine journeys thought, and Ukrainians in the room thought, that we probably have reached the peak. But actually there is even more steps, and it could be even more. So it's quite interesting to capture this, because it probably goes against predictions that some of us maybe did last year. Okay, if you don't mind, we'll go to the next question. So actually, I think it's easier if you do that, Mika. Thank you so much. So what do you think is the likelihood of the ceasefire happening in the coming 6 months? Okay, results are still coming in. I'll wait for a bit longer.
Hopefully we have 0 for likely.
That's why I was like, let's see if we have an optimist in the room. We don't. That's okay. You'll see as well that when we go into the oblast-specific results and national results, it's also quite accurate. Very few people think it's likely that a ceasefire will happen in the coming 6 months. Actually, the majority thinks it's totally unlikely, combined with unlikely. We will also see that when we go through the national results later, that there was a lot of people that responded no idea, and we will dive deeper into what that actually means. Okay, next question. What are the main challenges in Ukraine right now? Security, housing, livelihood, social cohesion, access to education. Also wait for a few more responses. Okay, so we're seeing that security is one of the main concerns, and results are still coming in. So actually, which again you will see, this is also quite reflective of what we see in the communities. Although there is a much more equal divide, it's not as dominant security, and we can also go into analyzing what that result means. But it's also important to remember that while, of course, security is a hinder because it's a domino effect to other factors, housing has been a huge one, access to education, but also employment, especially if we talk to returnees, etc. No one responded social cohesion. That's really interesting that we're in a room with NGOs and donors who are very much focused on a humanitarian emergency response. And I will link this to some of the results we show later, that actually where a lot of civilians are calling for more inclusive programming that addresses dialogue and mediation efforts. Okay, next question. And this one is the last one on the current snapshot, and then we're moving to future questions. Do you think there is any lack of trust / social tensions in the community? If yes, over what? And if no, there's a no option at the top. And then we have access to resources, political and ethnic divisions, tensions between authorities and civilians, tensions between IDPs and host communities. Okay, so some responses are still coming in, but yeah, I will say that this is actually quite accurate. In communities, there were a lot of people who said that there were actually no tensions, but if the majority was always saying that there were some sort of tensions, and you will see later what the main tension is. So stay active, stay listening. but it's actually not the same one as we have here. So that's a little nugget I can give away. Okay, if we look to the future, very small text, but I'll read it out for you. Do you think local Romadas are prepared / ready to begin recovery reconstruction? So basically, do they have the capacity, the means, the resources to start early recovery work, to do early recovery work? Okay. Okay. Some results are still coming in, but I will say that this actually differs quite a bit from what civilians have responded. And again, we'll go to that a bit later, but just something to bear in mind, sometimes how differences depending on where you're looking at things and perceived. So this one is something worth taking up later. But yeah, it's probably the one that has differentiated the most to all the tests we have done this far. Okay, next question. What do you think would encourage people to return? Security guarantees, prepared infrastructure, employment opportunity, community dialogue, reconciliation efforts, critical services being reopened, schools, health services, etc., etc.
How I can choose all? I cannot choose.
Yeah,
all.
we should have more options. The main one. Yeah, you can think of
Would
it.
accommodation fall under infrastructure?
Yes. Sorry, yeah, it's exactly repaired infrastructure, repaired housing as well.
Housing, civilian infrastructure.
Okay.
This is a question for people who live abroad. Because they live in Ukraine.
But maybe you move somewhere else in Ukraine and you want to return.
No, but absolutely.
Sure, but
Yeah.
yeah. But it's a good one. We can go even further next time, right? Okay, so we have some results in here, and yeah, we see of course employment opportunities is one of the main ones, but there's also quite an even split in the room or division between the different options, and we see that as well in the assessments, again, just shedding light on how wide the humanitarian needs are and how much work there is to be done for effective and voluntary return. But yes, employment, housing are the main two ones, as you'll see later. And the next question is, what are the key priorities following a ceasefire, halt in fighting? So this is the last question focused on return regardless, but this is like, imagine that there is a halt in fighting, ceasefire. What is the first thing that local Romadas should do, prioritize, donors should invest in, etc.? What do you think?
You don't have answer or relax. Like, a little bit.
A little bit.
First time relax.
But one day and then they get to work,
And,
right? Yeah.
Just 1 hour at least.
Yeah. Okay. So here we have a few more answers for MHPSS, but you see both MHPSS and reconciliation activities, which are maybe more seen as peace building efforts, etc., get a bit lower, and that it's kind of normally the common consensus within INGO communities and donors that first you really need to take a leap into more humanitarian needs such as housing, but also employment, etc. And I would say this is also quite an accurate representation of what we saw with civilians, although it's more split. So there's more people, of course, saying that also MHPSS and reconciliation.
I would quick to like intervene, sorry, because it makes me think right away that even representing protection cluster actually marked housing. With the thinking that, I mean, knowing that this mostly comes forward from the IDPs, but also like this is such a multiplier of every other protection risk.
Exactly. So of course, what's to take first, and then other things will follow, hopefully. Okay, last question before we dive into the results. This one, are there any external risks that could obstruct recovery programs? Yes or no? Yes. Yeah, and I think like we can keep going, results will stay the same, and this is really what we see in communities as well. People are very aware that while it doesn't matter how competent local authorities, Ramadas, initiatives are, if there are not those external guarantees, there will be no sustainable peace. And again, of course, when we asked who to civilians, there were two answers that were the most common. So of course, Russia, but now also the US. And I think that really links into why we started this ceasefire assessment to begin with, because with this shift of support from the US, shifting from aiming for a durable peace from the US administration, to an immediate end to the war to almost all costs, it's really shifted this feeling that Ukraine will be prioritized and put first. And this is something that's even trickled down to civilian level. So here, yeah, you are very much aligned with the community members as well. Okay, thank you, Victoria, for that. And thank you guys for participating. You will be share the results at the end of the presentation that you can also take home and see, then compare to what we said in this room to what the civilians have said. But now if we go to the presentation, to the camera presentation, and look at the Oblast-specific findings. Yes, so I'm just going to go through. So again, all of those questions that you just answered, we have for each oblast in each Ramada. So it's a very detailed assessment. So if you feel like, oh, but you didn't mention social tensions here, but you mentioned earlier, it exists. But I'm trying also to just give you the headlines and what stood out. But then you can do your own reading at your own time. Okay, so let's start with Kharkiv. So in Kharkiv, the assessment indicated a deterioration because this was the only one that we also did in June as well as January, whereas the other oblasts we started in January. So what's quite interesting is if we compare it to June to now, is that we've seen a marked deterioration, whereas in June, more people said that the security situation had been improved, whereas now almost, 77% said it was worsening, and at least, 19% said the same. Another trend that we saw, which was quite interesting, was that social cohesion was listed as a more immediate concern now than it was in June. It had increased with 10%, and so had also, and when you look at the possibility of a ceasefire, it was also more pessimistic view, and you see that with still 35% said it's possible or likely, but the majority still says to some extent that it's unlikely. A correlation that we spotted here, which you will see is true for each oblast, is actually that your perception of safety links to the perception whether you think the ceasefire is likely or not. So for instance, if a participant responded that the security situation is improving, they are also then responding that it's more likely that a ceasefire will happen. Now, this is not necessarily rocket science, but I do think it shows that if we want that to be a credible ceasefire with civilians put at the center, their safety needs to come first. And this is something that we can, as a community, NGOs, authorities, really push for, that until civilian infrastructure is stopped being hit, there is no civilian that will actually believe that the ceasefire, whatever it might look like, will actually hold, that it's likely for it to be endurable.
The interesting point that you mentioned to me when we were going through this was it's actually comparable to the nation level conversations that are happening where Ukraine is insisting on putting forward security guarantees before resolutions of peace are made, whereas Russian Federation is speaking towards, these guarantees need to be happening before a stopping of violence.
Yeah, so we have seen that in the national dialogues that Zelensky is really pushing for, we will only do some sort of concessions once the fighting is stopped, and then we will do elections, then we will blah, blah, blah. Whereas, of course, from the other side, it's going to push, no, you need to do the elections first, etc. But this shows, again, like a match with what's seen at the local level, that until civilian security is guaranteed, there will be no credible deal, right? Then we also see here, you see this one as well, 25 said yes, 1 said no. We see a strong confidence in the local Hromada that they will actually be able to rebuild and engage in recovery efforts. So I would say this is the one that differentiated the most, because a lot of us in the room said no, but we will see throughout all of these that there's actually very strong confidence in local authorities that they can do this if it wasn't for these external threats. And I think that's quite interesting as us as NGOs, donors, NGOs that work on these questions, like what we think the capacity of local Ramadas are versus maybe what they actually are, or at least what they're perceived to be from civilians. So this is something that we'll see throughout the assessment as well. And then you see types of support and what would encourage people to return is very even. And again, it just shows the like widespread and variety, array of programming that will be needed in the future. So there's space for everyone, I was going to say, but there's a lot of space and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Here we have some quotes from the assessment. And I think that the bottom one really shows this social cohesion increase, tensions. People are people and they're always arguing, especially when everyone's on the edge. We're all tired and overreacting, but the real problem will arise when someone takes up the weapons. There might be plenty of those. And when asked to expand, they were explaining, well, there's weapons everywhere. We know where to find them. And my fear is that when they're no longer in the hands in the hands of someone that actually is aiming to advance one group over the other. So it's interesting because while we might think that humanitarians are the most important, like after 4 years of war, of course, social cohesion and tensions is rising, and it's evident even at a very local Ramada level. Okay, then we move on to Kherson. Kherson was actually the most different oblast than all of the other oblasts that we assessed, because this oblast was the one that reported the highest percentage of improving. 46% said the security situation is improving, 46% said it's worsening, but still, it's almost 50-50 half. What's interesting in this is that when we did this assessment, we did it in the oblast. So often when we think about Kherson and security situation, human safari, you've heard of as a term, the drones, it's most common in the city. But if you go outside the oblast, because this front line is stagnant because of the Dnieper River, actually compared to occupation and even right after deoccupation, it is the general consensus that security is improving. So it's quite interesting because often we have NGOs and donors that say they can't go to Kherson, but maybe again it's because we're not thinking of the oblast, but a lot on city and nearby areas. That's not to say that everyone should go there now without proper duty of care. Please have UAVs, frequency analysis, etc. But it's still an interesting perception picked up from civilians living there. It's also the highest number of of people assessed that said that it actually is likely that a ceasefire could happen in the nearest 6 months. And again, it links to this correlation that we spotted that if you say that the security situation is improving, you're also more likely to say that it's a higher likelihood of a ceasefire taking place. Another thing that we spotted in this assessment was that, again, there was a strong confidence in the Ramada local authorities to enter reconstruction work. Not even a single person said no, they're not able to do it. But again, you have this external threat here. And also what would encourage people to return and future recovery, you see employment opportunities being the number one for both. And when speaking to civilians, they had a strong confidence that Khersonians would return as soon as, if there were the opportunities to do so in terms of work, housing, etc. So that differs as well a bit from other oblasts where they said that people would not return because they had nothing to return to. Then we move on to East. We go to, some quotes. And you see this at the bottom, again, represents this readiness. In our community, we are ready. However, we are facing some challenges like drones activity together will pass this although. And then at the top, you again see this devastation of conflict. Imagine you're hoping for something, even during the war, trying to make some plans, and then attack comes, and that is the end to that. So it's still this, I mean, just because 46% said it's improving doesn't mean it's ideal, right? It's what do you compare it to before? So, yeah. Now we move to Donetsk. In Donetsk, you see there is no one that says the security situation is improving. I think we can all understand why. Equally, there is a small percentage that the extent that it was possible and likely. And the highest percentage that we assessed, I had this, no idea, just hoping. This was something we added after doing it in June, assessment in June, when we realized that a lot of people refused to answer this question. Because they said, why are you asking us? We don't know, we're not involved in this, ask the government. And then we added this option because we really wanted to capture this apathy. And having lived in Donbass, having experienced war since 2014, we can really imagine this apathy is high. And civilians really feel detached from politics and having any sort of influence of that. When talking about the future, a lot of people, again, mentioned security guarantees, employment opportunities at the top. Something that was also really interesting was that reconciliation activities came up in Donetsk. And also one slide that's not on here is that when we asked about what kind of initiatives you want to see in your local Ramadas, a lot of them were mentioning participatory democracy practices, interactive decision-making, inclusive decision-making, and reduce the gap between authorities and civilians, specifically referring to mandatory evacuation procedures, etc. Yeah, and here again, we have interviewed two host community women, and both of them are, of course, again, capturing this apathy of like, I just wanted to stop, but I don't want to think about it because it's too much. These quotes, again, everything is available on our website, so I know I'm going through it a bit now, but I also know that TikTok, we don't have a lot of attention span, so this is...
Speak for yourself.
Okay. Now we go to the south, Odessa. So Odessa is quite interesting because here we really see that if you look at the most pressing concerns, a lot of people, it was the first oblast where people don't respond security, but it responded economic opportunities, specifically referring to tourism actually, that has been shut down. And it was much more focused on socioeconomic pressures rather than security pressures. Yet we see that there is about half that says the situation has worsened and half that says staying the same / improving. What's also interesting is that there has been a reduction to humanitarian support, specifically to Odessa. Last year it was deprioritized in the HNRP. I know it's back this year, but this has could maybe link to why there's also a lot of participants that report that there's a high level of tension between community members, specifically in relation to access to resources between IDPs, hosts, and returnees. So again, maybe that shows the lack of attention or aid or NGOs operating in Odessa. A lot of organizations have moved out, has actually left a vacuum that now could potentially be fueling social tension. So that's why also when we look in the future, you see employment opportunities. Also MHPSS is a big one. And that was because in Odessa it was also the highest level of veterans that we spoke to. And it was also veterans, if you look at the trends, mainly veterans responding this. Housing reconstruction, of course. And again, here it was actually the highest level of critique or skepticism towards the local Romadas that they were able to address or embark on recovery processes. And again, maybe this is again that local Romadas haven't necessarily received as much support as in other frontline Romadas, but again, it's just assumptions we don't. So here we're also capturing some of these social cohesion tensions. The family of those killed missing feel angry with both the community and the state. Wherever they go, they face bureaucracy and don't feel supported, which is causing tensions and conflict, specifically referring to servicemen coming back, returning, reintegrating. And then I dream that children attend school in person, that they won't be shaken by anxiety caused by air raid, that they will sleep soundly at night, that the curfew won't prevent people from working and getting home at night, etc. So again, this desire for normal life, but also really the MHPSS component. Okay, last oblast before we go into national findings and then ultimately recommendations is Mykolaiv. So in Mykolaiv, we have seen again, like there's a split between staying the same and worsening. When we look at the possibility of a ceasefire, it's also quite low on the possibility and likeliness, but it's more split among the other options. Housing and infrastructure damage really came out as the main priority here. And in Mykolaiv, it was also the main, the assessment that had the most returnees. And there was a lot of returnees that were reporting their struggle to reintegrate, and that there were some tensions between they don't understand why they don't have access to resources, whereas some IDPs do, and some were claiming that going through similar things. When we look at again, there's a strong belief that the Ramada is able to engage in early recovery efforts. And here you can see that security is almost not at all in both why people would like to return or future recovery, but it's really housing and employment. So that's interesting. That's what differentiates Mykolaiv a bit. And the other oblasts that all has security listed is quite high. Okay. So for instance, this was the pension I meant from female returnees that we captured. Questions arise over accessing to humanitarian aid. Why did he get it and I did it? There's a bit of resentment, greed, but that's just human nature. So not the most optimistic account, but definitely space to engage and ensure that humanitarian principles are upheld, but also that these like dialogues initiatives could start taking place between these different groups, etc. Okay, so we're just going to look at some of the national trends that we saw throughout based on everything. Okay, maybe Vika, you just do it. Can you go back one, please? Okay, I will ditch this because it really doesn't like me. Okay, so national findings. So again, security perceptions are worsening nationwide, but there are regional differences, as we saw. In the East, it's very pessimistic. So this improving section of 15% is almost only coming from the South. Again, that makes sense with shifting frontline versus in the South, more stable as a result of the river. So public expectations of the ceasefire are low. And again, they're closely tied to security conditions. So if you, once again, this correlation, if you feel secure, you're more likely to say that there's a high likelihood of a ceasefire versus when you're not. Then, if we look at immediate needs, there are shifting towards a mix of humanitarian, economic, and psychosocial priorities. So you see that there's while security always is the number one, and also, as we saw, one that many people think we can't control. There's also housing and infrastructure, livelihoods, which come very close to each other, and actually social cohesion and trust, which is the fourth one, or third one, depending on how you see it, as a joint second place, which again shows that while we are focusing on humanitarian efforts now, there really is a space to start engaging in social cohesion efforts and dialogue and mediation. And this feeds into the next one, when we see that there are, the majority have reported that there are some sort of tensions, and you see that most of these are due to access to the resources. There's also some about political and ethnic divisions. But you see here, if you compare to our results, we said that they would be between civilians and local authorities, but actually here, it's much more about resources, and again, we see that trust to local authorities is actually higher than maybe perceived at a national level. So that's quite interesting in terms of discrepancies. Again, return dynamics are closely linked to security, but we also see an even split between economic stability and the need for housing repairments. And lastly, as not a surprise at all, there's a huge skepticism that Ukraine can actually guarantee this themselves. And actually, a lot of Ukraine's fates are in the hands of both other countries, and predominantly, of course, Russia, but then closely second, the US. So, and the last finding, I think, is maybe the most important for people in the room, because it was really about how we can strengthen support and cooperation in the community. And we see that a lot of people are reporting the want for greater transparency from local authorities, community dialogue or mediation. This one, of course, goes against a bit with the trust of that was reported in authorities, but I think here what they're really meaning is more inclusive decision-making processes, utilizing the IDP hubs that have been established or other forms of coordination mechanisms or systems that exist. And the way forward, we have kind of based on this drafted some programmatic recommendations, which we think both INGOs can already start doing now, but also that donors could even start funding. We think. So I don't know what your government say. Okay, so the first one is support the scenario planning through trusted civil society actors. So while negotiations remain uncertain, CSO, NGOs, INGOs are well positioned to begin preparing the grounds already now. We, for instance, at MP have been doing early warning, early response workshops, but we really talk about what you would do in different scenarios, local actors. So instead of being in react mode, really start thinking proactively. 4 years into the conflict, you can actually do that because there are some predictions of what would happen when certain shifts are made, etc. We were also talking about promoting community-level ceasefire awareness and preparedness. This is actually a finding that this research supports, but it's also a lesson learned from the Minsk Agreement. So from the Minsk Agreement, it was reported that a lot of civilians didn't understand always the mandate of OSCE. So there was the monitoring vehicles that drive around. They didn't know if they could provide humanitarian aid or not. And they didn't also know the mandate when they were asking them questions, and then in turning their eyes not getting aid as a result. This caused some confusions of what a ceasefire actually is and what it can actually achieve. And I think already now having some sort of like ceasefire education, talking to local civilians and romadas, etc., about, okay, what could it look like? Who would be responsible for what? And especially we have seen in Ukraine, we have such a vast network of local organizations that could really take a natural space in that and shift from their emergency response and those trusted relationships they've already built with civilians, turn them into a form of ceasefire strengthening tool, right? By supporting and building up the ceasefire. Then we said establish oblast level advisory platforms to capture local perspectives. And this is not to be confused about establishing any new mechanisms. I think Ukraine has a lot of existing structures, but just you saw how different the different oblasts are and even the different Hromadas. So just having some sort of database and capturing these perceptions, whether that is led by government, whether that is led by CSOs, not so much fast to say, but it does show that there needs to be some sort of advisory board based on realities on the ground, and then for it to trickle up to more a national level. As we saw from our results and the results from the ground, there are some discrepancies. So having these opinions really, really matters in terms of designing a just and credible ceasefire. Emergency and humanitarian funding should seek to build peace during emergencies. So again, I think a lot of funding has this mutual exclusive thinking. Okay, with the humanitarian funding, we cannot yet start dialogue work or mediation work because that's contradictory, and we would spend money on other things. The good news is that peace building is actually much cheaper than humanitarian response, because often what you need to pay for is coffee and tea and a space for people to come together and good facilitators to generate dialogue. So finding ways to couple humanitarian response with building these pockets of peace during, even now during the emergency response, I think would be really important. And the last one is, which you will not see in your beautiful book in front of you, but we have it here and it's also on the website, is that the civilian component is critical for the credibility of the ceasefire implementation and monitoring. So what we mean by this is that if this is just a decision made at a national level, detached from local realities, you see that correlation that we saw, the credibility of a ceasefire and the belief in it working might be lower. So this is kind of like a call and a suggestion to, in our advocacy work as NGOs, institutional organizations, NGOs, government, etc., to really start using the term civilian component in a ceasefire, whatever that might look like, and in a monitoring implementation. And at this one, before we move on, I would like to just give the floor to Tatiana, because MP on this one has just started sniffing this territory and how we can do this best. And one way in which we're doing that, I will let Tatiana explain.
To stay here or come to
Please come here. Yeah, there's a black dot here somewhere. Yeah, so they can all see. Yes, welcome.
Good afternoon to everyone. I'm Tatiana Kovalichenko, representing another Tatiana Kiselova here on behalf of Dialogue and Mediation Research Center connected to Kyiv National Academy. And thank you so much for giving the floor, because actually that's what we are trying to do with this fifth point. Because we created civil society platform for human security together with our not only peace builders, because we got a lot of them who are already doing something with dialogue and mediation in the region on a national level, but we also connected with human rights activists who are trying to do more and also to lobby on a national for our state, but also for international level. And right now we're trying to research qualitatively on the ground what people mean by human security. And that's one of the questions for your presentation from my side. What do you mean by security? And when people say that we want to feel secure, there are a lot of different dimensions. So we're doing research and also coming with all the civil society representatives to make a joint position, to discuss, and then to lobby it, and to get this inclusive ceasefire and this peace building process. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so you will see more about this, and we will make sure to share it in email, but this is a partnership that's just started, and with some parallel research to really bolster what we've done here, and in parallel with Tatiana's work. Okay, so now I would like us again to wake up a bit, because that was a lot of talking on my end, and go back to Mentimeter, and the next question here is, which of the following recommendations do you think is the most realistic / actionable? So right now, where you're sat, whether you're a funder, whether you're an implementer, whether you're local government, what do you think is actually the most possible for us to start already now? Okay, just waiting for a few more responses to come in.
We have enough platforms, you see. No more.
Okay. Let me get to 30 and then I'm optimistic that we can get as many opinions or somewhat. Right. Okay, maybe I should. Right. So here we have some results. Oh, okay. Still going. But we have support scenario planning through trusted civil society actors, the one with the most votes. I think this to some extent makes sense because it's something that, this doesn't necessarily inquire a situation improving or worsening, but it's just more general preparedness, right? Then we have promote community level ceasefire awareness preparedness. So that was kind of the ceasefire education I was talking about. Really happy to see this. Emergency humanitarian funding should seek to build peace during emergencies. But also this civilian component of a credible ceasefire implementation. A lot of talking from my end. It would be interesting hearing someone that chose maybe the support scenario planning, why you chose this and how you envision it. If there was anyone in the room who selected it. Jenya?
Huh?
Which one did you select as a
I
scenario
select
planning?
emergency, of course.
Okay. Scenario planning.
Yes.
The first one.
Okay, Cassia, why?
I mean, I think I just looked at the others and thought this one is just the most realistic because this is something that is already happening and therefore it's much easier to scale up. And this is the work NP's doing and a few other actors. This is like, for example, as compared to, because that would be like looking at the recommendations, that was the one when I'd love to see it happen. That's the one Zhenya chose. But I think the current humanitarian framework in which we are, yes, the emergency humanitarian funding should seek to build peace during emergencies. I see it very much as a need, but like being here now for 2.5 years, I see the humanitarian structures quite rigid and pushing us to be very humanitarian life-saving focused and not really go into the directions, related more to recovery, which I understand in the, time of shrinking financial resources, but it precisely prevents us from engaging in this important area. So I'd love that to happen. I think things need to change for this to happen. So that's why I chose, something that is already materializing.
Yeah, I think that's a really
should be scaled up.
Input. Because like you said, with a shrinking humanitarian landscape, maybe then calling for to do more with less is also difficult. But I also think maybe it's about changing the perception that has to be either or. Like I said, actually peace building, what we find in doesn't always have to be necessarily expensive, or it's not as expensive as humanitarian aid anyway. And it could be complementary. And I'd also add that I think humanitarians through community work that we do on a daily basis at a very grassroots level, we do have certain, let's say, value added in this process as well that we can, contribute with. So it would be good to build these bridges that I think should be improved.
Right, add on to that, because I also think I chose this one as well. And for me, this allows more space for the other realities of emergency. If that's the scenario that is most relevant for persons in like Kramatorsk right now, versus the types of scenarios that people in Odessa or Lviv may want to participate in, means like the response is still locally driven, and it implies invitation.
Okay, is anyone who chose, or if someone wants to speak, but chose to promote community level ceasefire awareness and preparedness, like this kind of ceasefire education? Did anyone?
Yes, I have selected this option because all the time in humanitarian response or any our intervention, I guess we are omitting somehow community engagement. I guess it is very important. We are doing what we have planned without consulting or sharing the information before the intervention, and we come with the ready to do result, which is sometimes not relevant or maybe not expected from the community. The same concerns the awareness of the community. And you nicely mentioned that that was with the Minsk agreement. And nobody knows what it is expected to do and how people can react or reflect to this. So that's why it is quite crucial and important at any humanitarian or recovery response. So that's why it's kind of important for me to get community involved to any decision, any peace deal or any other decision made by the national authorities regarding the community awareness and probably contribution.
And I think also why we put it here is because sometimes you think you can only do that, like Jana said, like once something is secure. Okay, now we have a ceasefire, now we can start doing ceasefire education, but actually that's when it's a bit too late, because doing that, because then attentions will be on loads of other things, whereas really engaging with civilians now, I call it ceasefire education, but it can be called whatever you prefer, but really raising the awareness of what is possible, because a ceasefire is also very different from a peace agreement. And this was another thing in Minsk, that was this tension of why am I still not feeling safe, or why can I still not do this? Because actually that is just the first step and it can look very different. And this is something I see, especially our CSOs, local partners in Ukraine, that has such strong relationship with the civilians, can already now start these engagement. And that's why I really appreciate that. You say like often we come afterwards when everything's planned, but this consultation can already start now.
Yes, should be vice versa.
Yeah. Great. Okay, one last question, and then we will. Oh yeah, sorry, Jenya.
No, I just want to say that I'm very happy that no one votes for establishing new platforms.
Yes.
Why? Because I think in Ukraine we have very active people actually on every levels, and everybody wants to create the platforms. And if we be serious here, of course it's a big pressure for all of us. I mean to spend time there. And some of the platforms are not so useful. And also our government are very open now, so you can see we can invite government also or to join planning scenario sessions or wherever it's chosen together, but not created new approaches because it's very hard now to focus. So yes.
Thank you. No, I think that's a really valuable result. And I mean, this is our launch. This is some sort of a validation exercise as well for us. And I think this means a lot. And as I said earlier, when we presented the recommendations, it's not necessarily so much about replacing existing structures, but enabling existing structures to take this role on. So for instance, whether that is done through, like I said, the IDP hubs, whether that is done through, I don't know, MPs hubs or RCC during your meetings at the PDC or whatever. It's just really this harvesting of information so that this can trickle up. Because now we're doing this research, and our aim is really to do it periodically, but how do we keep those perceptions and opinions alive? But you're right, it's not so much about establishing something new, but rather ensuring that this is a practice that continues. So that's really valuable. Thank you so much, Anya. Okay. So for the next one, I just wanted to, this is something we can actually just type, so you don't have to vote. So if you feel lazy and don't want to type, no stress. But this is a question, what is/can our role be at a national level to carve out space for effective back channels? Let me explain a bit of context of that. Right now, we have one track when it comes to peace mediation and negotiation, and it's at the highest level. But often, when we have seen in other peace processes, there were effective back channels between CSOs, between INGOs, whatever, human rights activists that were already existing, so that when some sort of agreement took place, they were ready to step in and strengthen. Examples of this were in Colombia, Serbia-Kosovo agreement, bad example, but the Oslo Accords were actually built based on a back channel, then that fell apart. But is there something we can do now? Because we know that there is these dialogues happening, they're very closed doors, very little is leaked to the press, which is actually a good sign. But what can we already do now, understanding that maybe we can't influence the talks, but we can still create conducive spaces for dialogues? Any suggestions? You can either type here and we will see it, or some, you can also just add that. People are feeling shy, but maybe it's because typing takes some time. So I will be patient. Okay, we'll maybe stop there then. If there's not many, we can still send them in if you're still typing. But we have one. So to coordinate multi-track approach and existing research. Here we go, more lobbying, have clear messages from the humanitarian community regarding importance. Yes. Government, reduce barriers. This was about multi-track approach and research. Orthodox Church leaders, track to diplomacy, very nice.
Can I ask who mentioned Orthodox Church leaders? Sorry. Oh, I did. Okay. It's already there, okay, but it's not known by the government. As you mentioned.
Oh, see? So
Yeah, I had a conversation with Finn Church Aid on my mind.
Yeah,
So-
I actually did it. So
Okay.
to share.
Oh, great. Okay. I'm looking at it.
just do it. We have some nice slogans here. Everyone matters. Great.
Oh.
Attracting donors. Yeah, so there's actually some really good ideas in the room. And I think I really like this one, have clear messages from the humanitarian community, because it's not, and that was what actually the fifth recommendation was about. We understand that most likely none of us are going to be necessarily invited into the room unless I have missed that someone. Yeah, maybe someone is. But what we really can do is unify messaging and really echo the same. So about the importance of the civilian component, why this matters to create endurable peace, etc. And I think, yeah, this is really interesting about the IDP councils, break down the sort of silos between humanitarian coordination structures, peace building mechanisms, direction. So essentially, these are all of our proposals in the coming years. So Sarge, are you taking notes? Yeah, SPC will be funding all of this. Surprise. No, not quite. But I think that we have some really good ideas, and it does show that even though some of our actors in the room are more traditionally humanitarian ones rather than peace building, some people work in different contexts where and have more experience of protracted conflict, that really now is a space that we can kind of start exploring those ideas, and it doesn't necessarily always have to be funded or a standalone project. It can be done jointly, like for instance what MP is doing now, together with what Tatiana just suggested. This is an initiative just based on an MOU and doesn't have legs or funding yet. So there's loads of space to be creative. And I think on that note, we will end the presentation in particular, and you'll get all the results in your phone if you participated. And then we will also make sure to share it in a separate email. But yeah, if we just go back to the Canva and end on this, the next one. So again, if you want to get to the website, you can scan it here. You also have the link, etc. We will make sure to send everything. But I was just wondering if anyone had any questions. Now is a great time to raise them. Yes, Saj.
Will you have this document in Ukrainian?
Yes, that is next step.
Right. Right.
Cool. Great. Yomi, when?
But it's planned.
Absolutely.
Yes, yeah.
All of our publications.
Yeah. No, it's obviously, I'm pretty sure you will do it just to make everybody aware that it will also come in Ukrainian.
Yes, it will also come in
in
Ukrainian.
order to ensure that everybody.
Excellent.
Yeah, by refugees, you meant people coming back from abroad or from other regions?
Actually, from other regions in Ukraine.
So not from coming back from abroad?
No. So actually, that is a good question though, because now that I think about it, I guess we didn't make them specify where have you returned from. It was a self-identification, so they said returnees. But the few that we did ask, it turned out they're from like Lviv or Kyiv, those in Mykolaiv. But I guess actually they could be from abroad as well.
In our research, we feel the difference in the approaches and use. That's a reason why.
Interesting. Yeah, no, actually we didn't specify that, but it would be a really good addition for the next data collection in June. So thank you. Yes, Natalia.
Thank you very much for the presentation. And in Kherson region, the security situation is improving according to respondents.
Actually, it's 50-50. So some people say it's improving, some people don't say it's around 50-50. But it was the highest percentage of those who said it was improving in Kherson compared to the other oblasts.
And I mean, especially for Kherson, you know, like all these short-range drones attacks, like this human safari, you know, from UN Human Rights Monitoring. But I just wonder, do you have an explanation? Is it like new normal for people, or if it stays at the same intensity, they perceive it okay? It's not positive, you know?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think I definitely think there's a sense of new normal, for sure. Again, having lived under drones and artillery attacks for so long. But I also think there is a comparison given how much of the oblast were occupied before. versus after. And with the frontline not shifting, I guess what they're comparing before with, it's still better, in their eyes improving. Then I also just again want to really highlight that if we would have asked this, because as you will see if you go on the website, we didn't do this in the Misto, like in the city, but if we did, I'm sure it would have been a higher percentage, let's say, worsening, because the oblast is very different also from the city. And that was also an intentional decision made, because often when we speak about oblast, we think about the cities, and we wanted to have a bit broad range. So I think that's also the discrepancy, how it's felt in Kherson city compared to the general oblast.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
A couple of things. Thanks, super interesting. And I was wondering, and for discussion later on, to what extent you're planning on further socializing these and presenting it. I'm thinking at regional level, in particular, I'm thinking of our area managers meetings and maybe with the snapshot of the specific region. Because I think it would be with the programming,
of course,
thinking that people have on the ground, organizations have on the ground. The second thing is, and linking to what Kasia was mentioning on this, is there a coordination tending to be very siloed here and a bit conservative? It would be great to have some of those findings well outlined to our colleagues, and pointing at where the spaces and opportunities are for making the linkages across the beyond the pure humanitarian responses, let's say. And the third thing is, and this is a bit, introspectively thinking, we are planning on having this Nexus working group within the NGO platform coming up soon, and I can imagine some of those discussions being brought into there. So even the things that you guys come up with ideas on topics to discuss there in the next months, I think this could bring some interesting conversations.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so this is the first launch event, and I think what will be really exciting is again streamlining through the different coordination platforms, because again the findings are so much deeper depending on where you go. So for instance, for the area-based meetings, you can really do exactly what I did now, but just on the southern ones. So if that's out of interest, we can absolutely do that and streamline it for our PMs. And I was also thinking just even the cluster meetings, right? Protection cluster, because it really links the civilian protection in different aspects. Second question.
It was more on the humanitarian coordination and bringing that to the spaces. Country team and the Nexus conversation there.
And I think this also links a bit to what Yomi said at the start, that we are really wanting to get more people involved, because essentially this is a code report. It has the different sections. So it doesn't have to be like MP's own data collection. We know that INGOs have a wide array of presence and actually distributing amongst NGO platform or clusters.
Councils.
Exactly.
Could assess that and just
and could really help bolster the results. And then what we could do is just choose a chunk of the data and do this periodic review. But the data collection doesn't have to be restricted to us per se, and that would be also another way of involving other actors.
What I really like about it, especially as it disaggregates towards the Ramada level, is we all have our mandate, we all do our needs assessment for the proposals. What this shows us is kind of the bird's eye view of where entry points could be, and building programming with community and getting consent with where their interests are for what they see within their own community. What's needed.
Are there any questions on the chat?
Yes, there are some questions, so I can read out loud.
Yeah, sorry, because otherwise if we take them on, it will be very quick.
So the first question is very specifically dedicated to the kind of long one. In the first few months after the full-scale invasion, there are a lot of talk in Ukraine and internationally about disabled people being dismissed or down-prioritized, and their situation wasn't good to start with. Disabled people need often differ vastly from the needs of normally healthy and able-bodied citizens, and those who are part of the workforce and pay taxes will need extra support. Are there any attempts to capture their needs in 2026, and what can be done towards safekeeping the disabled community? I imagine that becoming a more inclusive, socially cohesive society is extremely complicated in such trying circumstances. So this could be either an opportunity or also a complexity in no one has any patience or resources for. Can you say a little bit more about this issue?
Yes, so actually this is a great question, and normally in MP's assessments, we really have its own category for people that identify as having a disability. Here we did it, but it was a very small number, and maybe that's another limitation from us because this audience member or this person even is very correct in pointing out that there are different barriers, and especially we have seen this within MP when we have been advocating for evacuation efforts, housing, that the accessibility to sites are very limited, and that results in often people with disabilities staying longer in areas that are subject to insecurity because they don't see any option to evacuate safely. So that's definitely a perspective that should be included in this research, and it's definitely a limitation because that will be a very important aspect to consider. One thing I will say is not all veterans, of course, but a big group of veterans we interviewed also identified as having a disability. So I would say that that is, I mean, again, they should be separate, similar to what you said before, returnees from abroad, returnees from within. So there are loads of different subcategories and you can really make it broader. But yeah, that's something we can look into and make sure it's properly included in June. I also noticed time, so maybe just one other question from the chat.
Yes, there is actually one more question in the chat. What is your assessment about a possible return of refugees currently in Western Europe to Ukraine and their reception in Ukraine? Do you see potential tension for the social fabric, and what should be paid attention to when donor countries try to facilitate such returns in the future?
Wow. I'm joking. Really big question, and of course super important. And I think the experience of the war will have been totally different depending on where you live, who you are, where you're serving, where you're not serving, woman, male, disabled, did you leave? And I think that biggest discrepancy arguably is those that deemed it safe enough or decided that they will stay, they're comfortable with staying, and those leaving, because there's a total different justifications for both of those decisions, and they kind of contradict each other to some extent. So we can totally expect, and I don't think it takes like a conflict scholar to say that there would be tensions and could be, again, because of those justifications for decisions being so different. Again, when we asked returnees these questions, we mainly engaged with returnees that were internal to the country. So we don't have a different section for returnees from living abroad. And also we didn't conduct this assessment with the diaspora community because, again, it's really about capturing like local perspectives who are present there right now. But that is also definitely another aspect of it that I think needs to be considered. And I think really, again, that's why we're highlighting this as an assessment, whether what Tatiana is working on and with her team will be more of a research that could maybe capture these different nuances much closer than this. But it's a very good point, and thank you so much.
I'll just also add to maybe comment somehow that some of these dilemmas are also addressed in the UNHCR publishes intention surveys on both IDP, but with a large focus on refugees and also IOM. So that's where some of this issues, answers to some of these issues are also covered. Yeah.
Thank you. That's a resource we can send out after this as well, because I think it's a very important.
You're publicly available.
Yeah. Of course.
Just to add here, there's one just recently the report launched by the OECD as OECD, yes, on the crisis response to the crisis, the displacement crisis, and it's as well both returning from abroad and internal. So it was last week. It was launched this week.
Awesome. Yeah. No. Thank you so much, both of you, for highlighting this, and we'll make sure to send it. And actually, that's just another nudge to say that this assessment is not necessarily like revolutionary, and nor do we claim to have shed light on things that maybe we didn't know or that research or former conflict could have not told us. But I still think it's, again, linking it to that recommendation, which Vivian really didn't like, but about capturing these local opinions and storing them to be able to advise some sort of like build up like library or archive, whatever you want to call it, to really advise whoever is at a national position and could somehow have an influence on this. So there is, of course, other research that touches the subject from different angles, and we'll make sure to, after this event, when we send out all the slides, again, this link, etc., we will make sure to include these as well. So thank you so much for coming in person. Thank you so much for coming online. And for those, sadly, only those in person, there is food, wine, coffee, tea, lemonade outside, and we can continue the discussion there. And of course, Victoria, thank you so much for compiling all these Power BI dashboards. It's a lot of work. Honestly, if anyone's ever worked with Power BI, this is very miracle. And thank you, Yomi, Tatiana, MP team, and of course, a big thank you to SDC and Studio for funding it, and again, SDC for hosting us at UMC.
Thank you.
Bye.
Exactly. It was you asked for the wine, was it? See? I wanted to spell that really first name, and now I can back
Speak about that, but
Ja, nooit, ik ben